The Vilrax dominion had always been a power to be reckoned with. A species of towering, muscular warriors with thick, armored skin, the Vilrax were feared across the galaxy. Their reputation as ruthless conquerors stretched from one end of the stars to the other, their victories marked by the burning wreckage of countless worlds. They had built an empire by crushing weaker species, their might unmatched and their pride unshakable. And yet there was one species they had not counted on: humanity. To the Vilrax, humans were nothing more than an amusing curiosity. A young, reckless species with a history of war but no real power to speak of. They had seen the humans rise in the galaxy, watched them fight back against small threats on the fringe of their territory, but always dismissed them as insignificant. What could these soft-skinned creatures, barely capable of interstellar travel, do against a force like the Vilrax? Nothing, they thought. The Vilrax were wrong. It all began on the human colony of Titan, a small moon orbiting Saturn. Titan had been under human protection for years, but the Vilrax had grown tired of the humans' presence. They saw it as an intrusion into their vast empire, a small, irritating thorn that needed to be removed. It wasn't personal, it was simply the way the galaxy worked. The strong crushed the weak, and the Vilrax intended to make an example of humanity. Gorthrak, the Vilrax fleet commander, stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Ravager. The enormous warship was the size of a small moon, its surface covered in jagged spires and dark, menacing armor. The bridge was dimly lit, save for the glowing green lines that crisscrossed the control panels. Gorthrak's hulking form stood tall, his powerful arms crossed over his chest, his yellow eyes glowing with cruel anticipation. "Ready the fleet," he barked to his officers, his voice low and heavy like a thunderclap. "We strike today. Let the humans feel the weight of our power." His officers scrambled to follow his orders, their minds focused on the task ahead. The Vilrax were prepared for this. Titan's defenses were strong, but the Vilrax had dealt with far worse. The human fleet had never faced the full might of a Vilrax warship. They would break, just like all the others. The thought filled Gorthrak with a cold, savage satisfaction. As the fleet moved into position, Gorthrak looked out through the viewports of the Ravager. Titan, with its thick clouds and frozen surface, sat silently below them. From this distance, it looked peaceful, unaware of the destruction about to befall it. He couldn't wait to watch the human defenses crumble. But as the ships of the Vilrax fleet dropped out of hyperspace, a strange feeling settled in his chest, something he hadn't expected, a flicker of doubt. He ignored it. "Begin the bombardment," Gorthrak ordered. The Vilrax fleet opened fire, massive cannons erupting in brilliant bursts of energy. The first volley struck Titan's atmosphere with devastating force. A chain reaction of explosions racked the planet's surface, sending shockwaves through the ground. The moon shuddered as the human colonies scattered across the surface were obliterated. Gorthrak's eyes glinted with cold satisfaction. He stood, arms still crossed, watching the devastation unfold. This was going to be easier than he thought. But then, just as the first wave of explosions died down, something unexpected happened. A lone human ship appeared on the edge of the battlefield. It was small, barely the size of one of the Vilrax's destroyers, but there was something about it that caught Gorthrak's attention. The ship's sleek black hull reflected the light of the explosions below, and it moved with a precision he hadn't anticipated. He couldn't help but feel a flash of irritation. What was this? A single human ship daring to challenge him. He laughed darkly. "It's not even worth my time," Gorthrak muttered, but he didn't give the order to destroy it just yet. He was curious to see what this foolish human could possibly do in the face of such overwhelming force. The ship, a sleek destroyer called the USS Valiant, fired a series of bright, dazzling missiles toward the nearest Vilrax cruiser. The projectiles sped through space with incredible speed, striking the Vilrax ship dead on. The force of the explosion rocked the cruiser, sending it spinning out of control. Gorthrak's eyes widened, a flicker of surprise crossing his usually cold expression. "What?" he growled. This was no ordinary ship. He had underestimated them. The USS Valiant wasn't finished. It maneuvered through the wreckage of the destroyed Vilrax ships with graceful speed, dodging fire from the remaining warships. The human crew was calm, focused, every movement deliberate and precise. They weren't panicking, as Gorthrak had expected. No, they were fighting back, and they were doing it well. A streak of fire hit the Ravager as the human ship zoomed past it, the powerful explosion shaking the Vilrax flagship to its core. Gorthrak's hands clenched into fists, rage bubbling inside him. No human should be able to land a blow on his ship, not with their technology. Their weapons were supposed to be primitive, their tactics predictable, but this human ship, this Valiant, was different. It was no mistake, it was strategy. The human captain was good, far better than Gorthrak had anticipated. "Captain, we've taken damage to our outer hull," one of his officers shouted. Gorthrak hissed, his claws digging into the control panel before him. This wasn't part of the plan. This wasn't supposed to happen. "Return fire," he roared. "Engage all systems, destroy that ship." But the Valiant was already gone, darting into the chaos of the battle. The human crew was moving fast, too fast for Gorthrak's fleet to catch. And now the Vilrax were not only fighting the Valiant, they were fighting against their own arrogance. For the first time in his life, Gorthrak felt doubt. The humans were not what he had thought. They were not weak. They were not insignificant. And now, the Vilrax were starting to realize the mistake they had made. The battle for Titan had only just begun. The battle above Titan raged on, but the Vilrax fleet was no longer the confident, unstoppable force it had once been. The first surprise strike from the USS Valiant had shaken them, and now their pride was beginning to fracture. Gorthrak stood at the bridge of the Ravager, his eyes locked onto the chaos unfolding outside. His hands, normally steady and in control, clenched into fists, his sharp claws digging into the cold metal of the command panel. He couldn't believe it. A single human ship had caused this much damage. The Ravager, the pride of the Vilrax fleet, had taken multiple hits and the damage was still spreading. The crew was scrambling, trying to restore power, but the human ship kept moving, darting in and out of the battle with surgical precision. The crew on the bridge was tense. No one had expected this. The officers stood frozen, unsure of what to do next. "Get me a clear shot at that human ship," Gorthrak barked, his voice low and dangerous. He didn't care how many other ships they had to destroy in the process. That human vessel, so small and insignificant, had humiliated him in front of his entire fleet. No one, not even the Vilrax, humiliated Gorthrak. Outside the Ravager, the human destroyer continued to circle, a blur of motion against the backdrop of flashing explosions. Each of its missiles hit a target with deadly accuracy. The Vilrax ships were forced to shift their formations, trying to defend against the impossible onslaught. Gorthrak could see it now. The Valiant was a predator, smooth, quick, and relentless, and it was hunting them. "Captain, the enemy ship is moving toward our left flank," an officer warned. "They're attempting to disable our propulsion system." "Hold your ground," Gorthrak shouted. "Fire everything we've got." The Ravager unleashed a wave of energy fire, beams of intense plasma and molten metal streaking toward the Valiant. But the human ship was already gone, moving with impossible agility, dodging each shot by mere inches. The speed and unpredictability of the Valiant were not what Gorthrak had expected from humans. They were supposed to be slower, easier to hit, their ships lumbering through space like targets. Instead, they were fighters, real fighters, and that realization made Gorthrak's blood boil with fury. But before he could give another order, an alarm blared across the bridge. "Captain, more human ships inbound," another officer shouted, his voice panicked. Gorthrak's heart skipped a beat. More, he had assumed the humans had only a handful of ships, nothing more than a token defense force. But the reports were clear. A full fleet of human warships was emerging from the shadows of the asteroid field near Titan, hundreds of them. Gorthrak turned and looked at the view screen, his eyes wide with disbelief. A human fleet. How had they gathered so many ships without his knowledge? Had they been waiting here this entire time? His worst fears were realized when the fleet dropped out of hyperspace, appearing like a sudden storm in the distance. These weren't the weak ships he had dismissed. They were modern, powerful, and organized. Destroyers, frigates, and the massive dreadnoughts of humanity's first line of defense. Each ship was armed with the latest weapons, and they came together like a wall of steel. A wall that was now closing in on the Vilrax. "Deploy the fighters," Gorthrak ordered, his voice full of tension. "We cannot let them regroup. We must destroy them before they can form a proper battle line." But it was already too late. The human fleet was more coordinated than he had thought. Their ships moved as one, working together in perfect harmony. It wasn't like the Vilrax, whose ships were each led by individual commanders, each with their own strategies. The human fleet was unified as if they had one mind, one purpose. And that purpose was to destroy the Vilrax. The first volley of human missiles slammed into the Vilrax lines, tearing through their outer ships with explosive force. The Vilrax fighters tried to launch, but the human ships, advanced targeting systems, picked them off with ease. The air in the Ravager's bridge grew heavy with tension as Gorthrak's fleet was picked apart. "Status report," Gorthrak demanded. "The left side shields are down, Captain. The enemy is firing through our defenses," an officer replied, his voice shaking. "How?" Gorthrak snapped. "How can they be so fast?" The human ships weren't giving the Vilrax a moment to breathe. They moved in tight formations, their guns roaring as they tore through the Vilrax ranks. A human dreadnought, the USS Requiem, fired its massive pulse cannons, obliterating one of the Vilrax destroyers in a single blast. The explosion sent debris scattering in all directions, like a burst of stars. The Requiem wasn't finished. It immediately locked onto another target, another Vilrax cruiser. The massive ship's cannons fired again, a deadly arc of energy cutting across the void, and the second Vilrax cruiser was gone in an instant. Gorthrak's blood ran cold. He had never seen anything like this. The human ships, so much smaller, so much more fragile, were outmatching them at every turn. The Vilrax were supposed to be the masters of space combat, yet here they were in a battle they had underestimated. The Ravager was taking damage. The outer hull was pocked with explosions, and several of the ship's systems were offline. Gorthrak's face twisted with rage as he watched his fleet crumble under the unexpected onslaught. The Vilrax had never been so vulnerable. "Return fire," he roared. "Target their command ship, the Requiem, bring it down." But the human ships were faster, more unpredictable. The Requiem dodged and weaved through the assault, taking advantage of every opening. The Vilrax couldn't keep up. With every shot they fired, the human ships were already gone, striking from a new angle, forcing the Vilrax into defensive postures they weren't prepared for. The truth was sinking in for Gorthrak, and it was one he refused to accept. He had made a mistake. He had underestimated humanity. "Captain, there's another wave coming," one of his officers cried. "We can't keep this up, we're outmatched." The Vilrax were falling apart. Ships were fleeing the battlefield, their engines burning bright as they tried to escape. Others were caught in the relentless barrage of human fire, breaking apart in fiery explosions. Gorthrak's fleet, once a force of unimaginable power, was being dismantled by the very species they had deemed weak. In the distance, a new wave of human ships appeared, led by the Valiant once again. The sleek destroyer had already taken down several Vilrax ships, and it was closing in on the Ravager now. Gorthrak's heart pounded in his chest. He was losing, the humans were winning, and the realization hit him with the full force of a physical blow. The Vilrax were not the most powerful species in the galaxy anymore. Not by a long shot. The Ravager shook again, a tremor that ran through the hull and rattled every creaking metal joint. Gorthrak's teeth clenched as another blast from the USS Valiant rocked his ship. His eyes darted to the viewscreen, where the human destroyer weaved through the chaos like a predator hunting its prey. Its shields glowed bright blue as it dodged another volley of Vilrax fire, and its weapons sent deadly blasts toward the remaining Vilrax ships. Gorthrak stood rigid, his fists clenched. His pride, his entire reputation was being destroyed before his eyes. He had led his fleet with confidence, certain of their victory. Now that certainty was slipping away, and all he felt was rage. "Captain, we have lost 2 more destroyers," an officer called from the control panel, his voice barely audible over the roar of alarms. "Keep firing," Gorthrak bellowed, his voice full of fury. "We can't let them break us." But deep down, Gorthrak knew the truth. The humans had already broken them. His fleet was being torn apart, and he had no idea how to stop it. He turned to his second-in-command, Commander Rithor, a hulking Vilrax warrior who had fought at Gorthrak's side through countless campaigns. "Send a message to the fleet. All remaining ships fall back," Gorthrak ordered, his voice low but urgent. "We need reinforcements now. We need the devastation." Rithor hesitated for a brief moment before nodding and transmitting the order. The devastation was the Vilrax's flagship, a massive warship that even the humans could not ignore. But it was still days away, and the situation on Titan was deteriorating rapidly. Across the battlefield, Gorthrak could see the human ships forming up, an unshakable wall of steel that pressed forward with relentless determination. Their coordination was flawless, their tactics brutal but precise. He had never faced anything like it before. The human fleet moved as one, a single organism with a singular purpose, to crush him. And as he watched, something unexpected happened. The Metak Collective arrived. The Metak were another powerful empire in the galaxy, their hive mind a vast network of interconnected minds that made them more unified and efficient than any species Gorthrak had ever encountered. But even the Metak had dismissed humanity, believing they were nothing more than a passing annoyance. Gorthrak had heard whispers of the Metak's arrival. The Vilrax had hoped to call on them for support in this battle, but the Metak didn't work that way. They were not here to save the Vilrax, they were here to win the fight for themselves. Their fleet dropped out of hyperspace, a massive wave of sleek bioengineered ships. They formed up quickly, the hive mind controlling their movements with flawless precision. The Metak were not here to fight with the Vilrax. They were here to crush the humans, to prove their dominance over this young, arrogant species. Gorthrak's gaze hardened as he watched the Metak fleet advance. The presence of these new ships only added to the confusion in his mind. On one hand, he could feel his own pride wounded, his fleet in tatters. On the other, the thought of facing both the humans and the Metak stirred something deep within him, a burning desire to show that the Vilrax were not to be ignored. "Now is the time," Gorthrak shouted to his crew, his voice rising with anger and defiance. "We will not retreat, we will fight back with everything we have." But even as he spoke, he knew the truth. The Metak were no allies. They were just another threat, and the humans were still the bigger problem. Gorthrak could feel the weight of it pressing down on him. He had to make a choice. Behind him, the Ravager's communications officer spoke up, her voice filled with dread. "Commander, the Valiant is targeting our reactors. It's locking onto our power core." Gorthrak's heart skipped a beat. No, not now, not when they were so close to victory. If the Valiant destroyed the power core, the Ravager would be lost, and all the Vilrax forces would fall apart. They needed every ship they could muster. But as if the humans could sense his panic, the USS Valiant opened fire with a direct hit to the Ravager's midsection. The ship's outer hull exploded, sending sparks flying, and alarms began to blare all around them. "Damage report," Gorthrak roared, his hands gripping the console. "Shields are failing, Captain," the officer shouted. "We're losing structural integrity." The Ravager shuddered again, this time far more violently. Gorthrak's chest tightened as he realized how close they were to losing everything. In a moment of desperation, he turned to his second-in-command. "Prepare the fleet for the final charge," he ordered, his voice cold and steady despite the chaos around them. "We break their lines now, or we lose everything." But Rithor hesitated. "Captain, we can't hold out much longer. The Metak are advancing. They'll make it worse." "Let them come," Gorthrak snapped, his temper flaring. "We are the Vilrax. We do not retreat. We will crush the humans, and we will show the Metak that no one can challenge us." Outside, the human fleet was advancing, closing in on the remaining Vilrax ships with frightening speed. The Metak fleet, still a distance away, began to turn their weapons toward the humans, but the humans didn't flinch. They fired without hesitation, sending wave after wave of kinetic missiles toward the Metak ships. The Metak returned fire, but their weapons were slower, less precise. The humans were simply too fast, too well-coordinated. The Vilrax fleet, however, was a different story. It was struggling to keep up. Their once mighty ships were now just obstacles in the way of humanity's unstoppable advance. "Full power to the forward cannons," Gorthrak barked, his eyes narrowing as the Ravager turned to face the incoming threat. The Vilrax fired everything they had, their remaining weapons lighting up the dark space around them. But it was too little. The human ships dodged and fired back with terrifying efficiency, targeting vital systems on every Vilrax ship they could reach. Gorthrak's heart thundered in his chest. He had led his people into this battle. And now, standing on the brink of utter defeat, he realized how gravely wrong he had been to underestimate humanity. Then the moment of truth arrived. The USS Requiem turned toward the Ravager, its massive cannons charging. The massive dreadnought fired first, its blast tearing through space with a white-hot fury. Gorthrak's eyes went wide. The blast hit the Ravager head-on. The ship exploded with a force that shook the stars themselves. A shockwave rippled outward, pushing the remaining Vilrax ships into disarray. For a moment, Gorthrak thought he had been consumed by the explosion. But then, through the smoke and debris, he saw the truth. The Vilrax fleet had been shattered. The humans had won. And Gorthrak, leader of the great Vilrax, stood among the wreckage, broken, humiliated, and alone. The Ravager was gone. The realization hit Gorthrak like a blow to the chest. The ship that had once been the pride of the Vilrax fleet, the symbol of their dominance, was now nothing but a heap of twisted metal, floating in the silent emptiness of space. Around him, the rest of the Vilrax ships were in disarray. The enemy had shattered them, crushed them with relentless force. And at the center of it all was the human fleet, moving forward with the kind of purpose and determination that Gorthrak had never imagined possible. For the first time in his life, Gorthrak felt true fear. The USS Valiant was leading the charge, darting between the scattered wreckage of Vilrax ships, its sleek frame cutting through space like a knife. Behind it, the rest of the human fleet followed, a wall of steel moving with brutal efficiency. They weren't just fighting to win, they were fighting to destroy. Gorthrak stood frozen on the bridge of the Warbringer, a smaller but still formidable Vilrax cruiser, staring at the view screen. His heart was pounding in his chest as he watched the human ships close in on the remaining Vilrax forces. The battle, once a display of Vilrax superiority, had turned into a desperate retreat. "Commander," Rithor's voice was tight with panic. "We've lost communication with the rest of the fleet. The human fleet has destroyed most of our rear guard." "Do you see it now, Rithor?" Gorthrak growled, his voice hollow with anger. "They have destroyed us, the humans. They are a force to be reckoned with." Rithor's gaze hardened. "What do we do now, Captain?" Gorthrak looked at his second-in-command, the years of battle, bloodshed, and loyalty flashing through his mind. He had always been a leader of action, a commander who led from the front. But now all his options seemed impossible. The humans had taken everything from him, his fleet, his pride, and soon his life. "We fight," Gorthrak said, his voice low and grim. "We fight until the last ship is gone." But deep inside, he knew this was a battle they could not win. The human ships were too strong, too precise. His fleet was broken. The Medak, once allies in name only, had pulled back, unwilling to risk further losses in a battle that had already gone beyond their expectations. Gorthrak's mind raced, 1,000 thoughts crashing together. What had he missed? How had the humans caught them off guard so completely? The answer was simple. Humanity had surprised him. They were not the weak, inexperienced species he had thought. They were warriors driven by something deeper than mere survival. They fought for each other. They fought for Earth. They fought for the future. Gorthrak's hand tightened around the console in front of him. He had led his people into this, had convinced them of their superiority. Now it was all falling apart. He had failed them. "Captain," Rithor said again, his voice almost pleading. "We cannot win this. We must retreat." "No," Gorthrak spat, his eyes burning with fury. "We will not retreat, not after everything we've done, not after the humiliation." But even as he spoke, his words felt hollow. He had no illusions left. The Vilrax fleet was broken, scattered across the battlefield like scraps of a once mighty empire. The Warbringer itself was already taking damage, its shields flickering and failing as the human ships relentlessly attacked. The USS Valiant appeared again, a blur of motion, its weapons firing in quick succession. The Warbringer rocked violently as the first few hits struck, shaking the entire ship. Then came the second wave, a massive volley of missiles, each one finding its mark. The ship groaned, its outer plating cracking under the pressure. "Shields are down," the communications officer cried. "We can't hold them off, Captain." Gorthrak's gaze locked onto the human ship. He could see the captain, a woman, standing at the helm, her eyes focused with cold precision. The human captain was no different from the soldiers under her command. They fought with determination, with skill, with heart. And in that moment, Gorthrak understood. They weren't just fighting for themselves. They were fighting for something bigger. They were fighting for their survival, and they would not be stopped. He had underestimated them. The Vilrax had underestimated them all. The Warbringer shook again, and this time Gorthrak knew there was no saving it. His ship was doomed, just like the rest of his fleet. "Prepare to abandon ship," he said, his voice cold. It was a command that came out of necessity, not because he had given up. But even as he spoke, he knew it was futile. The human ships would never let them escape. His own officers looked to him, their faces pale with fear as they began to follow the orders. But before anyone could move, a voice rang through the ship's intercom. "Captain Gorthrak," the voice was calm, almost mocking. "I've been watching you for some time, and I must say I'm impressed. You fought well, but this is the end for you." It was the human captain, Lieutenant Jessica Corbin. She spoke with an authority that sent a chill down Gorthrak's spine. "Humanity does not die quietly," she continued, her voice unwavering. "We never give up and we never forget." Then the final blow came. A single shot from the USS Valiant's main cannon, a brilliant burst of energy, struck the Warbringer directly in the heart. The explosion was deafening, and the ship's entire core went critical. Gorthrak could feel the shockwave even in the command center as the ship's systems began to fail. The lights flickered, and then everything went dark. For a moment there was silence. The bridge was still. And then the ship's emergency lights flickered on. Gorthrak stood motionless, staring at the wreckage around him. The Warbringer was finished. There was no escaping this, no fighting back. Gorthrak knew he was beaten. The Vilrax had lost. His thoughts drifted to the humans, those fierce warriors who had proven themselves to be something far more dangerous than the galaxy had ever imagined. In the face of overwhelming odds, they had refused to surrender. They had fought with everything they had, and now the Vilrax were nothing more than a broken memory. The humans had won. And in the cold silence of space, Gorthrak, the once proud commander of the Vilrax fleet, understood that the galaxy had just been forever changed. The human era had begun. And it was one that the Vilrax, along with every other species, would now fear. In the quiet aftermath of the battle, as the last remnants of the Vilrax fleet drifted into nothingness, there was no joy in the air. The human ships had won. They had faced impossible odds, pushed through overwhelming darkness, and emerged victorious. But victory had come at a cost. The debris of shattered ships and broken dreams littered the once peaceful expanse around Titan. The human fleet had taken heavy losses, too. The USS Valiant, the small but lethal destroyer that had first struck the Vilrax, was now just a mangled wreck, floating among the broken pieces of the battlefield. Its commander, Lieutenant Jessica Corbin, had led the charge with courage and determination. She had pushed her crew to their limits, urging them to hold on just a little longer, just until the job was done. But the price had been steep. Many of her crew were dead. The ship had been damaged beyond repair. Yet, as the battle came to an end, it was her face on the viewscreens of the remaining human ships, her voice crackling over the comms, rallying what was left of the fleet. "All ships," she said, her voice calm but firm, "we've won today, but let's not forget who we fought for, the people we lost. The worlds we saved. Let's honor them by holding our heads high, knowing we are stronger now than we ever were." Her words were simple, but they carried weight, like a flame in the dark. In that moment, every human ship that remained understood what it meant to be human. They had fought not just for survival, but for something more, something that had brought them together through generations of struggle. They had fought for their future. But even in victory, there were still threats looming on the horizon. As the fleet's remaining ships began to regroup, the tactical screens flickered. Lieutenant Corbin stood at the helm of the USS Requiem, now the flagship of humanity's fleet, gazing out into the void. Her mind raced as she calculated the next move. The battle against the Vilrax had been fierce, but the galaxy was not done with humanity yet. The Medak Collective had remained on the sidelines, watching with detached interest as the humans tore apart the Vilrax. But now that the battle was over, their vast fleet of bioengineered ships, moving as one with flawless unity, began to shift into position. They had not acted during the fight, but they were not about to let the humans walk away unchallenged. They had underestimated humanity once, but now they were ready to correct their mistake. "Captain Corbin," the voice of Commander Elias Drake, her trusted second-in-command, echoed through the bridge. "The Medak are moving toward us. It's only a matter of time before they make their move." Corbin's eyes narrowed as she glanced at the tactical readouts. The Medak fleet was massive, an array of sleek organic ships that seemed to pulse with life. Their hive mind made them incredibly effective in combat, and their ships were like a single organism, working together in perfect harmony. But what they lacked was the spirit of individual determination. Humanity had learned that no matter how many ships the enemy controlled, there was no substitute for the will to fight. "Prepare for battle," Corbin said, her voice steady. "We're not giving them another chance to think they can break us." The crew aboard the Requiem immediately began to work in unison, readying their weapons, patching up their damaged systems, and aligning their tactics. Corbin could feel the weight of their trust in her. They were all battered, bruised, and exhausted, but they stood tall. It was more than just duty now, it was pride. They weren't just fighting for Earth anymore. They were fighting for their place in the galaxy. "Commander Drake," Corbin continued, her eyes focused on the view of the Medak ships approaching. Let's show them what humanity can do. The Requiem's engines flared as it powered forward, its massive cannons locking onto the first wave of Medak ships. The ship's shields, already tested in the fires of the Vilrax conflict, held strong. The weapons systems hummed to life, charging with deadly energy. Suddenly, the Medak launched a volley of biomissiles, their ships opening up like flowers in bloom, unleashing streams of deadly organic projectiles. The Requiem's sensors screamed a warning as the missiles cut through space toward them. Corbin's hands flew over the controls, her mind working at lightning speed. She had no time to think about what had happened. She had no time to mourn the losses. There was only the next move. "Divert all power to forward shields," Corbin commanded, her voice cold but sharp. "Evasive maneuvers now." The Requiem dipped and spun, narrowly avoiding the incoming missiles. The first wave of biomissiles exploded in a brilliant cloud of light behind them, but the Requiem was already moving, ready for the next strike. "Fire," Corbin shouted. "Target their command vessel." The massive pulse cannons on the Requiem roared to life, releasing deadly bursts of energy. The first few shots missed their mark, but then the Requiem hit one of the Medak ships squarely in its heart, ripping through its bioengineered armor. The explosion sent a shockwave through space, but the Medak did not flinch. They continued forward, relentless in their assault. But the human fleet wasn't finished. Behind the Requiem, the remaining human ships fired in unison, their smaller ships darting in and out, firing at impossible angles, making it almost impossible for the Medak to keep up. The human strategy was working. They weren't just relying on firepower, they were using their speed, their unpredictability, their sheer willpower. Corbin's heart raced as the battle unfolded. She could feel the weight of her decisions in every move she made. But even in the chaos, she never wavered. Humanity had come too far to fail now. "Commander," one of the crew shouted, "the Medak command vessel is vulnerable." Corbin's eyes locked onto the target. She could see it now, the enormous central ship of the Medak fleet, its organic hull pulsing with energy. If they could destroy it, they could break the hive mind, throw the rest of the Medak fleet into disarray. "Get me a clear shot," Corbin ordered, her voice icy. The Requiem's weapons fired again, this time a barrage of focused energy blasts, each one striking the Medak command vessel with pinpoint accuracy. The enemy ship groaned as it began to break apart, its systems failing, its hive mind disrupted. The remaining Medak ships faltered, their once perfect coordination dissolving into confusion. One by one, the Medak vessels were destroyed. The rest of the human fleet closed in, striking down every enemy ship in their path. As the last Medak ship fell, the humans were victorious once again. Corbin stood tall, watching the battlefield, her body exhausted but her mind sharp. She could feel the weight of what had been accomplished, the immense sacrifice and the strength of every crew member who had fought alongside her. "We did it," Commander Drake said, his voice full of awe. Corbin nodded, a quiet smile on her lips, but her mind was already focused on what lay ahead. The galaxy had witnessed humanity's strength. They had fought against impossible odds, and they had won. But Corbin knew this was just the beginning. The galaxy would now fear them. And humanity would never stop fighting. The battle was over, for now. The human fleet, battered and bruised, floated in the cold void of space, their ships drifting slowly among the wreckage of the Medak fleet. Victory had been hard-won, each ship a testament to the bravery and sacrifice of every human soldier who had fought. But even as the last of the enemy ships fell silent, the cost was clear. The USS Valiant was gone. The USS Requiem, their new flagship, was heavily damaged, its hull scarred by the brutal fight. Lieutenant Jessica Corbin stood on the bridge of the Requiem, looking out at the remains of the Medak fleet. Her eyes were tired, but there was something deeper in them, a fierce resolve that burned bright even in the aftermath of their most brutal battle yet. "We've lost too many," Commander Elias Drake said, his voice grim as he approached Corbin. His eyes scanned the damage reports on the screen in front of him. "But we did it. We've stopped the Medak. We've proven they can bleed." Corbin nodded, but the victory felt hollow. Yes, they had won again, but the Medak weren't the only threat in the galaxy. There were others, stronger, more dangerous. The Vilrax were still out there, nursing their wounds, and Gorthrak, leader of the Vilrax, was still alive. The Vilrax had been decimated, but Corbin knew they would regroup. They would come back, and when they did, they would be angrier than ever. "Don't fool yourself," Corbin said, her voice hard and sharp. "This isn't over. The Vilrax will rise again, and the galaxy won't just sit back and let humanity take over. We've made enemies today, Elias. Enemies who'll do anything to wipe us out. Drake met her gaze. Then we'll stand ready. As if on cue, a voice crackled through the intercom, pulling them back to reality. Captain Corbin, the voice of the fleet's communications officer called out. We've just received a distress signal from Earth. It's coming from the outer colonies. They're under attack. Corbin's heart sank. No, not now. Put it on the screen, she ordered, her voice tight. The image flickered to life, a planet on the edge of human space, Earth's distant cousin in the outer reaches. The signal was clear, ships in the distance, bright against the dark backdrop of space. And what was worse, the ships were unmistakably Vilrax. They had come for Earth. They didn't waste any time, Corbin muttered, her heart pounding. She turned to Drake. We need to move now. The Requiem's engines powered up, the ship groaning under the strain of its damaged systems. The rest of the human fleet, including the surviving ships from the Medak battle, fell into formation behind her, a united front ready to face the Vilrax once more. But Corbin knew this time would be different. The Vilrax were angry, and they had more ships than ever. As the human fleet set course for Earth, the tension among the crew was palpable. There was no time to repair their damaged ships. They were already too far into the fight. Their only choice now was to survive and hope they could hold back the Vilrax long enough to make a stand. The journey toward Earth was silent, the void of space stretching endlessly before them. Corbin stood at the helm, her eyes focused, but her mind was elsewhere. She thought of Earth, of the people there, unaware of the danger that was heading toward them. The civilians, the children, the families who had no idea that war had already come to their doorstep. It felt like everything they had fought for, everything they had suffered, was at risk of being wiped out in a single, crushing blow. Captain, Commander Drake's voice pulled her back from her thoughts. We're getting closer. We've detected several Vilrax warships on the outer edge of Earth's orbit. They're preparing to attack. Prepare the fleet, Corbin said, her voice calm but carrying a weight of finality. This ends today. The Requiem and the rest of the fleet broke through the edge of Earth's atmosphere, the distant blue and white planet coming into full view. And there they were, Vilrax ships, massive, menacing, and fully prepared for war. The Vilrax had arrived, and they weren't here to negotiate. They were here to destroy. Open fire, Corbin shouted. Human weapons fired first. A barrage of missiles, energy blasts, and plasma torpedoes tore through the silence of space, slamming into the Vilrax ships. The energy shields of the Vilrax warships flared brightly with each hit, but they held firm. The Vilrax were ready. Their ships retaliated immediately, firing back with devastating force, and the human fleet responded in kind. Corbin's pulse quickened as the battle unfolded before her. She had faced the Vilrax before, but this time was different. This time they were fighting not just for their survival, but for the future of their people. The ships around her, even the damaged ones, fought with a desperation they had never known before. This wasn't just about defeating the enemy, it was about protecting everything they had worked so hard to build. The Requiem dodged and weaved as enemy fire streaked past them, narrowly avoiding a direct hit. Corbin's hands moved over the controls with practiced precision, ordering her crew to concentrate fire on the Vilrax command ship. If they could take down the flagship, they could cripple the enemy's forces. Then, as if the galaxy itself had decided to test humanity's resolve, the devastation, the Vilrax's largest warship, emerged from the chaos. Its hull was dark and imposing, its weapons ready to tear apart anything that stood in its path. Captain, it's a devastation class, Drake said, his voice filled with a mix of awe and concern. It's their strongest ship. I know, Corbin said through gritted teeth. Target their engines, we take out their speed and we take away their power. The Requiem's pulse cannons fired, striking the massive ship's engines with all their might. The devastation's shields flared, but they began to weaken. The Requiem hit it again and again, each strike tearing through the ship's defenses. Suddenly, the entire ship shook as enemy fire slammed into the Requiem's starboard side. The blast sent the crew stumbling, but Corbin kept her focus. Status report, she demanded, her voice hard. We've lost power to the starboard shields, came the reply. Keep firing, Corbin ordered. We finish this now. The Requiem pressed forward, its remaining weapons aimed at the Vilrax flagship. In a final, desperate move, the Requiem launched everything they had at the devastation, sending a final volley of energy blasts into its core. The Vilrax ship erupted in a brilliant flash of light, sending debris scattering across space. The shockwave sent ripples through the battlefield, but humanity's fleet had succeeded. The Vilrax flagship was gone. The remaining Vilrax ships, seeing their leader fall, began to retreat, unable to stand against the human fleet's relentless assault. Corbin stood in the silence that followed, her heart pounding in her chest. She looked out at Earth, its bright blue surface gleaming against the black of space. They had done it. The Vilrax were beaten. But as the dust of the battle settled, Corbin knew this war was far from over. The galaxy would never look at humanity the same way again, and the human race had proven one undeniable truth. They were not just survivors, they were conquerors. And the stars would fear them. The silence of space was deafening. After the battle, the shattered remnants of the Vilrax fleet drifted like broken ships of a lost empire. The human fleet, battered and scarred, floated in the quiet aftermath, their engines idling, their weapons still but ready. The stars twinkled brightly in the distance, untouched by the chaos that had just unfolded. Lieutenant Jessica Corbin stood on the bridge of the USS Requiem, her eyes fixed on Earth. The blue planet below them, so vibrant, so full of life, was a symbol of everything humanity had fought for, everything they had sacrificed. The Vilrax, once thought to be unstoppable, had been defeated. The Medak, the galaxy's silent watchers, had learned the cost of underestimating humankind. But as Corbin stared out at the swirling clouds of Earth, she knew this wasn't the end. Victory came at a price, and humanity had paid it in full. The Requiem, once a symbol of hope and power, was now a hulk of broken metal. Her crew had fought with everything they had, pushing beyond what any human should have been asked to endure. The battle had taken its toll on everyone. They had won, yes, but at what cost? Captain, Commander Elias Drake's voice pulled Corbin from her thoughts. She turned to find him standing behind her, his face tired but resolute. "We've secured the system. The Vilrax are retreating. The Medak fleet has turned back for now. We've won the battle." Corbin nodded slowly, her fingers tracing the edge of the console. The words seemed hollow. They had won, but the victory felt like a temporary reprieve, a brief moment of calm before the storm. "We've done more than just win," Corbin said quietly. "We've made a statement. The Vilrax learned the hard way that humanity won't just lie down and let anyone destroy us. But we've also sent a message to the galaxy, a message that may be more dangerous than we realize." Drake's eyes darkened with understanding. "You're thinking about the future, aren't you?" "Yes," Corbin said. "The Vilrax will regroup. The Medak will never forget what we did. They will come back and others will come. We've made powerful enemies, Elias, enemies who will never stop, not until they've seen humanity crushed underfoot." Drake stepped forward, his boots tapping against the cold metal floor. "Then we'll be ready for them." Corbin turned to face him, her expression resolute. "I don't know if we can keep fighting this way, Elias. We've lost too much. Our fleet is decimated. Our people are wounded. If we keep pushing, we may lose everything we've gained." Drake's face softened, a rare moment of vulnerability in his eyes. "We fight because it's who we are. We fight because it's the only thing we know. The galaxy thought we were nothing. They thought they could erase us with a flick of the wrist. But they underestimated us. We've shown them what humans are capable of. And no matter how many enemies we make, no matter how many battles we face, we will fight. We will always fight." His words were simple, but there was power in them, something deep, something undeniable. Humanity's strength was not in their ships, their weapons, or their technology. It was in their spirit. It was in their refusal to give up, no matter how dire the circumstances. "Humanity doesn't bow," Corbin said, a fire igniting in her chest. "We never have, and we never will." As the Requiem and the remaining human ships limped toward Earth, the fleet's survivors began their long journey home. The human colonies, scattered across the galaxy, would be waiting for them, waiting for the news that their protectors had prevailed. But that moment of peace would be short-lived. Back on Earth, the governments and military leaders were already preparing for what came next. The war against the Vilrax had shaken them to their core, and the victory had been bitter. They knew that their enemies were only temporarily defeated. Earth was vulnerable, and humanity could never let their guard down again. They would need to build a new fleet, strengthen their defenses, and prepare for a future filled with threats they couldn't even imagine yet. Corbin watched as Earth grew larger in the viewport, a blue jewel in the cold void of space. She had lived her entire life knowing that humanity was young, that they were still finding their place in the stars. But now, after everything they had been through, she knew one thing for certain. Humanity was no longer the weak, fragile species the galaxy had once seen them as. They were powerful, they were a force to be reckoned with, and they would never stop fighting. The Requiem touched down in Earth's orbit, its engines sputtering but holding together just long enough to reach safety. As the ship docked with the massive space station above Earth, the crew slowly began to filter out, weary but proud. They had been through hell, but they had come out the other side victorious. Corbin took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the battle finally lift from her shoulders. She knew there was more work to be done, more battles to fight, but for now they had done the impossible, and they had done it together. The door to the bridge opened, and a familiar voice called out, "Captain Corbin." It was her XO, Lieutenant Reese Carter. His face was etched with exhaustion, but there was a smile on his lips. "You did it, Captain. We all did it." Corbin smiled back, the weight of the world still on her shoulders, but lighter now. "We did it together, Reese, all of us." A silence fell over the bridge as they all gathered, the survivors of humanity's greatest battle. For a long moment no one spoke. There was no need to. The victory was theirs, and they had earned it in blood, sweat, and tears. The price had been steep, but the lessons learned were priceless. "We've shown the galaxy," Corbin said, her voice steady but filled with resolve, "that humanity doesn't bow to anyone. We fight, we survive, and we win. And we will keep doing that no matter what they throw at us." The crew stood in solemn agreement. They had not only saved their world, they had made it clear to the galaxy that humanity's time had come. No longer would they be pushed around. No longer would they be underestimated. And as the Requiem slowly descended back to Earth, Corbin looked out at the stars. She knew that the road ahead would be long and dangerous, but she also knew one thing. Humanity had found its place among the stars. And they would fight for it always.